Welcome everybody who is attending tonight, and welcome to Lena Drapella, who is a professional climbing photographer and will be interviewed today by another professional photographer, Andy Day. Both Lena and Andy have in the past photographed the Women's Bouldering Festival, so that's a nice little connection there. And they have collected some questions for Lena from the internet, and the interview will follow these. But if any of the participants, if you've got any questions that come up to you during this talk, then feel free to drop them in the Q&A section at the bottom. And other than that, I just would like to remind you that tomorrow we've got another session which will be on sustainability in everyday life. That will be with Hélène Collin and Gemma Powell. And on Wednesday, we've got our last session, which will be on trans inclusivity in climbing and beyond with Electra Zacharias. So only 2 live sessions left, but again, you will get all of your replay links after. And let me finish my little intro by saying huge props to Patagonia for sponsoring these sessions and the festival that happens physically the coming weekend in Fontainebleau. And I will hide now and leave you in the hands of Lena and Andy.
Thank you, Zofia. You're going to have to try and hide your screen now, which is always a fun process. I'm going to start off by explaining why I'm here. Obviously, I'm connected to the festival because I'm Zofia's partner, but also I'm a photographer and hopefully an ally and something of a feminist as well. And I've also photographed quite a lot of women's events, mostly parkour events, but also Girls in Blow here in Fontainebleau. Zof, at the moment, all I can see is the logo for the Women's Bouldering Festival. So I don't know if the gallery view mode is actually working at the moment, but well, we'll see if that changes. I'm going to do this really embarrassing thing for Lena now, which has been done to me on the odd occasion, which is to introduce her by reading the bio on her website, which I don't know, in my experience is always the most cringeworthy. No, I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to say that she's a UK-based climber and commercial outdoor photographer specializing in adventure sport and climbing events. Graduated from the Academy of Fine Arts, so there's a bit of thought behind her photography. And is a keen climber as well. I think this is one of the things that distinguishes good photographers from everyone else out there, is the passion for the thing that they are photographing rather than just being an observer. They're actually a participant observer, and you can actually see a lot of that in the imagery as well. Lena, I think you're now based in North Wales. That's so from one attic to another. You want to tell us where you are at the moment?
Yes, I have moved to a little town in North Wales, quite close to Llanberis, which is quite well known in the climbing world. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. I've only moved here in April, so it's quite a new place for me, but it's absolutely wonderful. There's so much climbing around, but not only that, there is there's 5 different rock types within an hour's drive, but you also have lakes to swim in and the sea that you can surf in, and like mountain biking trails, all kinds of outdoor activities that you can think of. So yeah, it's a pretty good place to be. That
sounds pretty amazing. So from what I understand, were you living in a van prior to this, or at least you were very nomadic and probably still are to a degree?
Yes, yeah. So maybe not entirely, I haven't lived in a van. I was living in Bristol beforehand, but since moving to North Wales, I have actually spent more days sleeping in my van than I did in the house due to the nomadic lifestyle. But it's always nice to have somewhere to come back to from the travels and the work trips.
And so how many days are you on the road a year? I mean, pre-COVID and now, I guess.
Well, it's difficult to say because it's changed recently. Since, like, as I said, since April, my life has changed quite a lot due to change of jobs and going full-time freelance. But since then, it was definitely half of the time. And I'm assuming this will continue, if not more than that. So at least 6 months, I would expect.
So what changed in April?
So yeah, beforehand, I was part-time employed as a photographer for a company and part-time doing my own freelance work. Since April, I'm only freelance and only working for myself, still as a photographer, but yeah, just for myself this time.
and you follow the climbing circuit around the world for part of the year, all of the year?
Part of the year, yeah. So another thing that's changed this year is that it's been my first year photographing the IFSC events, which will hopefully continue in the future. However, so there is quite a few of us as photographers that follow the circuit. There's 4 official photographers for the IFSC. So rather than covering the whole season, which would be pretty hardcore because there are a lot of events all over the world, we distribute all of the events between the 4 photographers and then end up with 4 or 5 events each, which is, I think, a great balance to have between work and life.
Yeah. So those events are quite diverse by the sound of things. Like it's not just a lead climbing and a bouldering comp.
Oh yeah, no, there's loads. There's speed boulder, lead. There are combined events. There are before the Olympic qualifiers. There are youth events. So it is like, if it was one photographer who wanted to cover all of it, it would probably be pretty much every other weekend from March till October.
Oh, wow.
Which would be pretty intense. So yeah, there's a lot of events to cover. So hence why there's 4 of us to do the job.
And I guess you're a pretty familiar face at these events. You know a lot of the athletes.
I think that is a great place to meet all the athletes. But yes, so it happens I have had a chance to meet a few of them beforehand in the outdoor world, which was really nice.
Good stuff. And so how did this come about? You graduated with a fine arts degree. What was your path into photography, and how does that connect to climbing?
So it doesn't have anything to do with my degree, actually.
Okay. Classic.
Funnily enough, yeah, classic. I always wanted to be a designer or interior designer, or more specifically furniture designer. That was like my dream before I started climbing. And that was the pathway I was following into that world of art and design, hence the uni course. There wasn't any photography on my course, sadly, but we had all the other like sculpture, painting, graphics, and all of those things. The photography came around when I started climbing, which was halfway through university. And I think it was just as simple as, when you start something new and it's very exciting and I just wanted to document it, both the sport itself and the places it took me and the people I met through the climbing. And so it kind of like went all together. The passion for climbing and the passion for photography started at the same time and evolved, or are evolving still, linearly, if that's the word.
I mean, I can relate to that because similar thing for me. I found a sport, started photographing it, started doing it. So you kind of know climbing through photography, and you know photography through climbing, you'd say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always difficult. When people ask you, are you more of a photographer or more of a climber? Like, are you a climber who photographs or a photographer who climbs? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, both. Yeah. So it's difficult to prioritize which one's more important or has a bigger, impact on my life.
I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult to go out and do one and be expected to do the other. Like if I'm out climbing, I find a struggle sometimes to take photographs. And if I'm photographing, like I can't join in. I don't know. Is that the same for you?
Oh yeah, it's a constant battle between balancing the two. It's so difficult. Like I think I had it nailed, and then I'm still struggling with it. At the moment, I'm trying to diversify my climbing days versus my working days. So if I'm going to go to the crag to photograph, I'll try not to bring my climbing shoes, and vice versa.
Wow.
If I'm going climbing, I'll try not to bring my camera. And it tends to work because obviously then you do what you set out to do. But pretty much every time you'll be like, oh, I wish I had my shoes, or oh, I wish I had my camera. But I think this is, something that you have to decide beforehand, because it's difficult to almost impossible to do both, especially if you're going climbing with one person, then it's pretty much set up that you're going to climb. But yeah, it's difficult when, the environment is the same for both passions, I would say.
So you're mostly a trad or sport climber? What or is it many different types? It sounds pretty diverse.
Yeah, I think quite diverse. I definitely started off as a sport climber predominantly, I think from this year, I mean, trad climbing has always been part of my climbing experience because I live in the UK and I started climbing in the UK. So I was always familiar with trad climbing, but I would never say this was like my main discipline or something that I enjoyed most. It has changed quite a lot this year, and this summer I pretty much trad climbed mostly, which means I'm really weak now, but my head's all right. So I'm looking forward to getting back into to sport climbing and bouldering with a bit colder temps. But yeah, it's quite nice to finally be able to enjoy the trad climbing and, you know, dive into this world a little bit more.
Awesome. So you start climbing, you start photographing. How did that evolve?
In what sense? You mean
where did you start publishing? How did you start landing jobs? Like, was it just kind of organic?
Yeah, it was definitely organic, I would say. It definitely took a few years before anything like that happened. I can't remember the first like publish. I think actually Nat Geo was one of the very first things that published one of my photos, which was like kind of a Kickstarter for me, mentally more than anything. You know, initially they just like shared it on their Insta. I think I just like used a hashtag or something, like literally like very basic thing. I just used a hashtag on one of my photos. They found it, they first shared it on Instagram, then they used it as their like backdrop image on Facebook, Nat Geo, and then they published it on their website, and I was like, cool.
What must have been a pretty awesome photo. What was it?
I mean, it was all right. It wasn't, you know, the photo was actually, I mean, it wasn't, you know, it was a good photo, but it was took on like Nikon D90, you know, which is the first camera I ever had, which is not a great camera. It's like less than £100 right now. It was a photo that I shot from like with a remote, because I was actually belaying in a photo. So I just balanced my camera on like a bunch of rocks and just like did a time lapse with like, I don't know, 200, 300 photos, and one of them was okay, you know. So it's a bit of a funny story. But yeah, they found it and they used it and they paid for it and all those things. And I was like, I think, you know, when you're just a very beginner photographer, like very amateur, you know, as I say, I was shooting with like a camera that's less than £100. When something like this happens, it gives you like quite a boost of energy that what you thought would be impossible dream might actually happen if you, well, with a bit of luck, but also, you know, with a lot of hard work, that yeah, it could possibly happen. So yeah, I think that was like, it was quite organically, but then, you know, more stuff happened and brands started getting involved, and I managed to land some small jobs and bigger jobs and bigger jobs, and, you know, just, it's still evolving, you know, I'm nowhere near where I would want to be. But yeah, it's quite that's a funny story, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty awesome. I'd love to have one of my photographs published by National Geographic. I was going to mention a few names, but like Jimmy Chin, an inspiration. Who else?
Yeah, Jimmy Chin is for sure. Renan, probably even more so. Yeah. But there's quite a lot of female photographers as well that I would like to mention that have been one of the things that, you know, I struggled with initially, maybe with that dream as well, was that I couldn't really find that many female photographers that I could, you know, ask for mentorship or aspire to be, or, you know, look at their work. And one of the very first ones that I found is Claudia Ziegler, who's an Austrian photographer. I don't know if you've seen her work. It's mostly commercial, but it's absolutely beautiful. Maybe you've heard of the book The Young Savages.
It rings a bell, but no.
So that's Claudia's book as well. It's an incredible book where she documents more like day-to-day life of young climbers, and that was published, I'm not sure, maybe 5 years ago or 6, and like at least I think like half of them now made it to Olympics. You know, it's like she had it spot on who she decided to follow. But the photos she takes are often a bit more intimate and like less staged, you know, less, I mean, some studio stuff and some like climbing porn stuff, but more like deep into the person and trying to portray who they are. And that definitely inspired my work somewhat. But who else? Tara Kurtzner, she's a photographer and filmmaker. Savannah Cummins is another one. So yeah, a lot of inspirations out there for sure.
going to be one of my next questions, actually. I mean, asking about the number of female photographers working out there. I mean, climbing, as much as it's pretty positive in term, compared to some other sports in terms of the gender balance, still, male dominated. And photography, wow. I mean, one of the most male dominated professions. How is it working as? I mean, I'm going to put a guess. The 3 other accredited IFSC photographers. Any women?
No, they're all men. So to my knowledge, I'm the first official photographer who's female working for the IFSC, which I'm really grateful for. But yeah, I mean, it would be great to see more females involved for sure. I mean, IFSC itself has a pretty good balance between all the officials when it comes to male and females. I'm not sure where that imbalance comes in from photography, but I'm glad it's changing. Same for route setting. I would say that's like another issue where I think maybe one of the issues could be the pathway, that there isn't any like specific pathway to become a female route setter or a male route setter for that matter. And the same with photography. Actually, the way I got the job was by outreach. Like I was writing emails to many people for over many years, and eventually I got a response, and again it was quite a good response in a way that they said, yeah, because I obviously sent my portfolio and I said where I've worked and my pathway to where I am currently, and I've also noticed that imbalance between men and women within the IFSC. As a photographer, as I said, I couldn't see any other female photographers. And I mentioned that in my email, but in reply, they said, we appreciate your point on the gender imbalance. However, we just want to make sure that it's the best person for the job. And I agree with that. And I'm really happy that they decided to hire me, not because I'm a female, but because they've decided I would be good for the job. But I think the imbalance might be coming from how many women have the opportunity to get there in the first place, to have, same like with route setting, they decide to choose the best person for the job, but the way they, I think at the moment to become a route setter for the IFSC, you need to be selected by the National Federation, but most of the selected people are males. So IFSC doesn't really have a choice of women to choose from. Regardless of them wanting to have more women in the team. So I don't know whether it's a system issue or how would it be best to fix, but I know that these subjects are, part of the topics, part of the conversation. So there's definitely change coming, hopefully.
Oh, that's really good to hear. I mean, so what sort of challenges would you say you faced being a woman in the world of photography specifically?
So this is difficult question for me to answer because I'm only a woman, I'm not a man. So I don't know what challenges do men face, and I'm assuming that a lot of them are the same. The only thing that comes to mind straight away would be the mentorship, and seeing other representatives that you can relate to, which is something that I struggled with initially. But other than that, I find it difficult to answer because I don't know. I'm assuming, despite the gender, the challenges are similar.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I ask is because, I write for a photography website and I hear tales all the time of women being discriminated against in terms of, men just assuming they don't know anything, or if they turn up a shoot, it's assumed that they're the assistant or, going to make tea and stuff like this. But that was the reason for that question. But I think from what you said, it seems that one of the biggest difficulties at the moment is just visibility. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg thing, in that if there are people that you can see who do those roles that people can identify with, then more people will put themselves in position to be able to take those roles, kind of thing. So yeah. It sounds like the things are moving in the right direction, and that's, there's a lot of maybe pros and cons brought about by the institutionalization and commercialization of climbing. So I guess you think as it grows, things will improve?
Yeah, coming back to your previous question, I don't think I've ever felt particularly, or I could put a finger on a situation where I have been discriminated within the photography or climbing world because of my gender. You know, there are moments where you think like, why do they say that? But you can't really like fully decide whether that's because you're new to photography or because your work doesn't speak for itself as much as you maybe hoped so, or maybe because it's your gender. But in general, I don't think I've had like many situations where I would say my gender was the reason for why I didn't get the job or I did get the job. I'd like to think it's because of my work, but you know, it's kind of hard to say for certain. So on my personal experience, I don't think I have been discriminated in that sense, and I hope it's the case for many other women too, at least within the climbing or the outdoor photography world. I guess it may vary slightly in other photography worlds. Because climbing and outdoors are, you know, probably slightly a bit ahead of the game. Maybe not exactly where they should be just yet, but I think they probably are slightly more diversified.
Something that I realized over the course, it took me a little while to realize over the course of my career, is the power of my imagery to create visibility for marginalized groups. And I'm wondering if that's something that comes into your work. Are you conscious of who you're photographing and what kind of stereotypes they fulfill or don't? Or if you ever try and kind of, I don't know what's the right question, but yeah, how aware are you of giving visibility and giving representation to marginalized groups in your work?
It depends on the type of a shoot. When it comes to events, I don't really have any input over that. Like if it's an IFSC event, then I'm there to photograph everyone who's there, if that makes sense. When it comes to commercial shoots, more so, it will be good to have more people of color. Generally with commercial shoots, you'll have a male and a female anyway. But yeah, it's probably, you know, it would be important not to like over sexualize females and, you know, have the same amount of photos and the same amount of, well, same taste for both genders, I would say. Yeah, I'm not sure if that entirely answers your question.
Well, I mean, yes and no. I guess what I'm asking is, how good is the climbing industry generally at representing marginalized groups, and how do you see your photography fitting into that? It's kind of a difficult one. I mean, if you're being commissioned or if you're photographing events, there's not a lot of room for kind of giving more attention. I guess the Women's Bouldering Festival is a good opportunity to put those images out there, and other events that are designed for smaller groups.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that.
Okay. So you photographed the Women's Bouldering Festival. I've kind of lost track of time. It wasn't last year, it was the year before?
Yeah, I think it was 2019, possibly. Yeah, because it didn't happen last year, did it?
No, it did happen last year, but it was
it
was relatively small, and I was I had my camera in my hand for that weekend, stepping into your shoes.
Nice.
But no, I was just wondering. I was going to ask what it was like photographing that event.
It was great.
If you photographed anything like that before.
It was absolutely brilliant because of the nature of the event itself, rather than, you know, being a photographer on it, but like more being a part of the whole event. So I've not photographed that many I've photographed the Women's Bouldering Festival, and I photographed a Women Rock event in Sardinia. The other events that I have attended, like a women's climbing symposium in the UK. And every time you are a part of that festival, whether you're an official, whether you are a volunteer, whether you're a participant, for me, it definitely creates something special, because the environment created there, it's you feel safe, you feel welcomed, everyone's so friendly, and there's so much, other things that I mentioned, like mentorship going on within the climbing world, so much inspiration to be taken from other women. But yeah, it's definitely a joy to photograph.
Yeah, I can relate. I used to find events generally quite, not so much boring, but yeah, not that engaging. And then I kind of developed an appreciation of capturing these little moments of victory and actually giving someone who might otherwise not feel very athletic kind of this image of them looking in control and strong and powerful, and to be able to give them those moments as the result of an event is kind of really satisfying. Is that something that you find as well? I guess you probably do.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. It's also really nice for people to have a photo of themselves from an event like that if they've had a nice time and they've got a memory of that, and reminder. And also, like, climbing is, you know, quite an athletic sport, so seeing strong women as well, for me, is always very inspirational. And, you know, tackling going into like body image issues here as well, like having the power to show strong women, I always find great.
Awesome.
The representation of you know, the athletic women's body rather than a fragile one.
Awesome. Do you want to show a couple of your photos? I realize that we've managed to talk for this long without actually looking at any of your images. Actually, to pick out a few that you might be able to show us this evening.
Yeah, sure. So I've got a slight selection. I think in one of other questions that you mentioned, you wanted to have a look at some of my favorite images or favorite locations, or more challenging shoots. So I can share my screen and maybe talk through some of the images. It's quite a large selection, so it's not like image by image, it's more like a gallery. But if there is any image that catches your eye, then feel free to tell me which one that is, and I can tell you a little background story about it.
Awesome, let's go. That sounds nice.
If that works, let me see if I can find this. Okay, let me see if does that work?
That works.
Okay, brilliant. So this is not a photo that I shot, but I just put it as a as a header. So I think starting with the most inspiring locations, or photos that I like most. The first photo itself is in Abella de la Conca in Catalonia, and it's probably one of my favorite locations to shoot. It was shot at sunrise, so it's quite a challenging for me because I'm not the most morning person, but and it does take a little via ferrata to access it, so you know, accessing that in dark is, well, maybe not like a very challenging, but you know, where you're being grumpy and you haven't had your coffee, it might be. The second photo is actually taken this summer, so quite recent, in the beautiful Ramirol crag in Verdun, which was the first time I've ever been there, and it absolutely blew my mind. I don't know if you've ever been there, but you walk into the crag. I've seen photos of this place before, but you walk in and it's enormous. It's so big.
Huge. That photo makes it look massive.
And it's like 3 times bigger than this.
Wow.
But it's so difficult to take a photo of the whole thing having a climber in it, because obviously if you take a photo of a whole cave, then the climber disappears. So this is like the biggest I could show with the climber still being visible. The climber here at Sebwell on his very, very hard project called DNA, which is probably 9C. But yeah, the line is insane. There's loads of other climbs, probably best enjoyed in 8s or high 8s, but absolutely outstanding. Yeah, definitely like a jaw-dropping place that you walk into and be like, oh my God. Next photo.
One quick question on that. Are you on the end of a rope for that, or are you on one of the like tiered?
On this particular one, I was not on a rope. I was just standing, but the access again is like a via ferrata one. I found with this location, I have gone on a rope a few times, and I never could like portray the place as big as it is, because you've got the climber in front of you, and also the nature of the route is like in the middle of the cave. So even though I have tried shooting it from the rope, I actually found the photos from the ground better. And that's often the case with climbing photography. That's one of the things that, you know, people are surprised by, that, you know, if you look at these photos, like I can tell you which ones are shot from the ground, but 1, 2, 3, first 3 are from the ground, and you know, I put them at the top of my list for some reason. So people always think that, oh, climbing photography is all about hanging in a rope, and it's not really, because it limits you a lot. You probably find that too. I don't know whether you shoot a lot from the rope or from the ground.
The only time I've shot on a rope is hanging off the top of a building for charity abseils. So never actually. I'm not much of a sport climber, and it's been a couple of years since I tried climb. So yeah, not much time spent on the end of a rope with camera in hand. That's for sure. Tell us about the
to be fair, you're not missing that much.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
I mean, obviously there are some shots that require being on a rope, and to get this one particular angle, you have to be there to see the emotion, to see the climber's face, etc., etc. But quite often, like, being on the ground allows you so much more flexibility that you can walk around, you can go further, you can go closer. There's a lot that you can do with it. So I just wouldn't dismiss it, because a lot of people would say, oh, first thing you go to the crag, set up a rope, whatever. We can talk about it for ages, so let's continue.
Good idea.
This one is actually of Nat. You might recognize Nat. She this one is also got a little funny story on it. That was during the Women Rock Festival in Sardinia. Nat is on, I think it's in a Cave of Dreams and one of the 7Bs. Nat is pretty strong boulder. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was photographing her yesterday, actually.
Yeah,
just like sheer coincidence. So
brilliant. So that is a really strong boulderer, but I don't know whether she sports climbs a lot. On this particular route, she had to skip a clip because it had like quite a hard move in it, and she fell off, and like, because it's a canyon, she actually hit her bum quite hardly on the other side of the canyon about 10 seconds after that photo was taken. So had a nice big bruise. Luckily nothing happened. But there is a moral to the story: do not skip clips in a canyon. Coming back to locations, the next photo is actually quite close to home. That's in a trad climbing paradise in Pembroke, which is absolutely amazing. It's such an amazing place. It's in Wales as well. It's slightly further down south, so it is a few hours drive, but it's absolutely great. I'm just going to scroll through these, but there is one that I've not published yet. So here is a little unpublished photo of Seb on bibliography from this summer. Wow. It was quite a good moment as well, because the clouds came. We set off to do some photos, and the clouds came, and Seb was like, oh, I'm not going to climb now. I'm not going to climb now. I was like, please climb, because it will look so good. But you can see amazing. In the back, there is like a water streak, like literally 5 minutes later, the whole wall was just soaked because it was pouring with rain. It was clouds everywhere, but it was quite a nice moment with the clouds and then the sun coming like just for a moment in the back. It was quite a good
So was this was personal shooting, or was this a commission from to documented? How did that shoot come about?
This particular one was personal. I met Seb on a commercial one probably two weeks before that shoot was taken, and it happened we both had some time off, and he wanted to try his project, and I didn't really have any other plans, so I was like, oh, I can come along and take some photos. But quite often with shoots like that, if the photos are any good, maybe you have a chance to sell them later on. So it was with commercial in mind, but more of a personal. Which gives you a bit more creative freedom as well, which is quite nice.
So a lot of your images must come about as a result of personal relationships and friendships with high-level climbers. That you just build up those, you network, and I hate that term. You get to know these people by being in the same places, and just, you get commissioned, you make friends with them, and end up shooting them 2 weeks later. That's a pretty typical situation, I guess.
I would say so. It's not like, it's not planned, and it's not
it makes it sound
regular or anything. But it does happen. I think it's just the nature of climbing world in general, that you just, you've got so much in common that you just end up climbing together with the athletes, I guess. Or it has been the case for me. Scrolling down.
I recognize Brioni.
That one was actually during a commercial shoot, so not often it happens that one of the commercial photos will make it to my top 50 or something, but I did quite enjoy that one. That was like after a whole day of shooting for Mamu, and we just ended up at this boulder, and I was like, you know what, we've done loads today, we've got everything that we need, so let's just play around and see what we can get. So just playing around with ND filters and slow shutter, and came up with this.
Nice. And the good choice of the bright orange top, and I mean, I think that's probably got to be the most photographed rock in Brioni, I'm guessing.
It was actually inspired by one of your photographs, funnily enough, the location.
I wondered if you shot it after I shot it. I had no idea it was there. As I've said, it's on the cover of the guidebook, we should take some photos there. I was like, oh yeah, sure, go on.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think if you're short, like I think the boulder problem is like a 4 or 5 or something. So that's the pretty low in the V grades, like 0.1 or something. But unless you're short, so, and it's probably like 2 or 3 grades harder. But anyway, we're not here to talk about my photos. Let's move on. There's an amazing portrait, that black and white portrait of
Molly.
Tell us about the portrait, yes, of Holly.
So that one was, again, not staged during a competition. It was one of the quiff competitions, and that was like just before she was about to, when you've got the timer and it's still in like 4 minutes, and you then like look at the clock, and when the timer starts off, you can turn around to start the boulder. That was like this moment. So like the anticipation to be able to get on the wall and show her best. I think that was even like the last boulder of a comp. So like, quite a stressful moment. It doesn't really show in her face, I guess, but it's more like the anticipation being like, all right, I want to get on it, I want to crush. And yeah, so it wasn't lit by me either. It was just a lucky moment, lucky place to be, and lucky positioning of the climber.
Yeah, I think that photo of Molly reminds me that like a lot of the time the photographs aren't necessarily of the climb. And something that really frustrates me is that I get involved with someone's climb when I'm photographing an event or something that they're doing, and then they get to the top and I'm feeling like I get this weird feedback off them, like I feel happy for them, put the camera down as it and of course that's the moment where they're like so exhilarated and I've missed the best moment of their climb. So if you're photographing climbers, that would be one of my tips for you, is don't put the camera down just after they're topped out, because that's often the best time to grab the photos. You must know that from all of the competitions, those classic at the top.
The classic
I miss
one arm pull up and yeah, that's a classic. This one's actually so like this is a good moment to take photos. One that I personally struggle with is if the climbers are struggling during the competition. Like quite often you can see, like in a high pressure environment, you can see climbers being really upset or really emotional or crying because they've missed their chance, especially in like lead comps, even more so than boulder, because with boulder at least you have a few tries, but with lead you have one shot, and if your foot slips, that's it, that's the end of your comp. And this is the moment when you can see a lot of athletes, they've spent like a whole year and probably the last 15 years training for these comps, and then the foot slips, and it's it's an emotional moment, and often you find them crying. And I find it really difficult to photograph those moments because I just want to go and give them a hug, I don't want to like put a camera in their face. But then often these photos are the ones where you feel the emotion, and I always, it's this torn, I'm just torn inside whether I should, respect their privacy and not take those images, or should I be like the other 15 photographers on stage and be like, go on. And it's a difficult one, because often at the time it seems like you're interrupting, it's their moment, you shouldn't really be there, you shouldn't see this. But quite often they do end up sharing those images because it tells the story of their performance or of their emotions, or the whole process that got them there. So these images obviously are valuable for the athletes themselves, but at the time you feel like you're stealing something from them, and you don't really want to do that. So that's one of the challenges during the comps, at least for me, I found.
Yeah, that sounds pretty tough. Tell us about just keeping an eye on time. So let's do 2 or 3 more photos, and then we should probably take some questions.
Yeah, I'm just gonna like scroll down slowly through those images. But yeah, if there's anyone in particular that keeps your mind, I mean, these are quite close to my heart because they're literally like 15 minutes away from home. Same as this. Well, that's actually in Pembroke as well. But like this is literally like a very short drive from home. This one's like 15 minutes away. So talking about locations, that was something that I've got this amazing place where I live now, and there's so much variety in the climbing world here that I don't know, it's just very exciting for me. And then we move on to competitions. So a few shots from this season, talking about the athletes. Like this one is kind of, well, it's not really as strong when the athlete, this is before the performance, is the anticipation, but when the athlete is about to go on stage, and you've got like 10 photographers taking the photos, and they're trying to focus, they're about to perform, and you're like, should I be taking this image or should I just give them a moment, but obviously everyone takes the image. So.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's about that. So these are just a few select images from this and past years. Let me just stop sharing.
I was going to ask, who's your favorite athlete to photograph in the competitions and then on the rock?
In the competitions, I think my top 3, I mean, Yanya is pretty incredible, you gotta say. It's not just a photograph, but just to like see, just to be there. Just her performance is outstanding, and just seeing her make moves possible is always a pleasure. And she's also like an incredible athlete, an incredible person. She's very humble but also very caring, and always just a very kind human being.
It's always good to hear when your heroes turn out to be nice people.
Yeah, I know, it's great. So Yanya is great. Brooke and Miho as well, I think, because of the emotions and just so I think that'll be my top 3 for the comps. For the rock, I think rock is slightly different because you're closer to the people. So the closer you are to the person, the better experience you'll have. So people that I'm friends with are generally the people that I would go for, or like people who are just fun to be hanging around. Like recently I had a shoot in Ireland with Maddie Cope, who actually did a talk with you guys, and she's just such a great person. She's so funny. It's just it goes so fast because the relationship's so nice and everyone's having a great time. So yeah, Maddie and Hazel are great to photograph for those reasons.
Yeah, so Maddie did a talk about a month ago now, which was on training and the menstrual cycle. You can catch that on replay if you go to YouTube through womensbouldering.com. You'll find all of the previous talks. I'm just going to, before I ask the next question, is remind our participants that if they want to ask a question, you can type that in the Q&A section at the bottom. No questions at the moment, which is fine because we've probably overrun a little bit anyway. But yeah, if you have any questions, type your questions in now, and I think Zof will jump in a few moments as well, because she will probably have some questions. My next question for you is where you're going next.
Well, unknown at the moment. There is a few things in a process of being established. There is one more competition that I'm hoping to photograph, which will be in Indonesia, for the IFSC. That is a speed competition, but it depends on on COVID regulations whether we're allowed in or not, so it's still waiting for confirmation. Other than that, I've got some plans in Spain, and in Catalonia, and in a Lake District, and yeah, just a few plans.
Yeah. How many of those are climbing trips where you think, we'll get some shots? And how many of those are, I'm going to go and photograph and maybe I'll get a little bit of climbing done?
It's generally mixed. It's generally, if I'm going there for work, I'll probably stay there for climbing afterwards. Also, like, from environmental side of things, it's better to just like extend the trip rather than have like multiple trips throughout the year. So where I'm being taken by work, I'll try to stay for at least a few weeks or even a month or even 2, to be able to enjoy the place and not add into the carbon emissions.
Awesome. Zop is waving at me, but I've got one more question, which is what climbing projects you're working on at the moment? What's on the doorstep that's waiting to be ticked?
I've got a couple projects around home, which I'm very excited to return to. Most of they're sport. So even though trad climbing has, recently reappeared in my life, I think sport climbing is still something that I'm most focused on. And bouldering more so, although injury is always a bit tricky with the injury side. There is a sport climbing route that I would like to do, which is close to home, but it's quite hard, so we'll see if I can do it.
Not giving much away. That's fair enough. Zof appeared briefly and started waving at us. Is she going to jump in? She is.
Yeah, I just had to do a very unprofessional way to break this very professional and sleek interview. Thank you so much. Yeah, we've got some Q&As coming in. Let me start with my little question. I always somewhat unwillingly bring these questions back to issues of gender, because on one hand, I feel like, oh, we got to stop making this distinction between genders. But on another hand, I'm like, well, we actually have to talk about it to break this distinction down. So would you, Lena, ever say that in your professional life, or even just in your life within climbing, you second guess yourself because of your gender? Because you're like, oh, I will do this to advance my photography, or because I want to do this, or whatever reason. And then you think like, oh, how is it going to be received because I'm a female? Do you ever find that, or are you like fully past these sort of insecurities that a lot of people who are socialized as women might experience?
I think within the professional world, not so much. I mean, I second guess myself a lot, don't get me wrong, but I don't think that's because of my gender. I think it's just because of, lack of experience in certain areas, or whatever. Like, I don't think gender has a massive issue in my professional life. When it comes to social media, a little bit more. It's an interesting one because of, I treat social media as work in certain ways, but obviously I also create my brand, and I am my brand, and I also sometimes feel like sharing something more personal, and in those more personal moments I always feel like, is it appropriate or is it not appropriate? So maybe more there than.
But would you mean appropriate like for you, or appropriate in terms of what the society deems appropriate? Like, do you think there is anything that comes up in your mind as an example of that kind of situation? I realize I'm kind of grilling you now, but
yeah, just a little bit. Kind of difficult to think of one example on the spot.
No worries.
But if I can think of something later on, I can let you know.
Yeah, for sure. And let us have a look at the questions that came in. We've got a question from Maria. I'm putting together an exhibition about UK sport female climbers, and could you give some advice whom to approach to have it shown in more than one place? So, touring exhibition, any experience in that regard?
I haven't had any exhibitions myself that were moving from place to place, but it would be worth asking the BMC, because they'll probably have contacts to all the climbing gyms that could help out.
Fair enough.
The other suggestion I would have for that, I don't know if there are any adventure film festivals happening, but if you approach them, you might be able to speak to them about finding a space that kind of ties in with the festival, maybe.
Yeah, Kendall could be a good shout. It's quite a big festival, and they often have a exhibition of sorts, so maybe that could be a good place to reach out to.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to organizing anything, as an organizer of the festival, not an exhibition, I can say that reaching out to as many people as possible is always the best solution. I hope that somewhat helps. And the next question we have from Drapella: do you teach any climbing photography workshops?
Yes, I do. I have actually had a couple workshops this year organized by a company called No Boundaries. I'm not sure if that's going to go ahead next year as well, but give me a shout and I can let you know where to find them.
And for now, these are all of our participants' questions, so I'm going to slip my own at the end. Oh, Andy has one.
No, I was going to say, do you do one-to-one? So rather than just laying on a workshop, can people approach you to do one-to-one or small groups if they organize their own small group, maybe?
I haven't done it yet, but I would be willing to look into that.
There's something to think about, really. Approach Lena and ask for a private tuition. Yeah. So just to wrap it all up, from my perspective, which I guess is in this regard similar to many other climbers in the community. You go out, you want to take nice climbing pictures, be it bouldering, say, let's divide it, bouldering and rope climbing. Would you be able to give like your top advice for boulderers and top advice for I don't want to say sport climbers, but climbers on a rope, what to do to have nice memories from your climbing trips?
I think one of the very underestimated things is running around like crazy around the place you want to take photos and scout out all the angles. So just literally, like, that's the first thing I'll do on a shoot. Well, first of all, I'll scout the location, but when I'm going into a new place, I'll just like run around and have a look from each place. Even if you think it might not look so good, just have a look, you know. I would say that's the easiest thing you can do is just use your legs. And
you mentioned before that the first photograph that you took that got noticed by a big outlet was actually not taken on a super pro camera. So would you say that you really need super expensive gear, or can people get by with some more basic stuff?
I think you can get by with a lot. It depends whether you want to do it in professional way or amateur way. I think creativity definitely helps out a lot more than the gear. Saying that, gear is important if you want to make a living out of it. It is helpful, you know. But, you know, yeah, the Nat Geo story is a funny one. But then the first photo that I ever sold was an iPhone shot. Not
wow.
Kidding. That was on like a stock image photography website. And I was like, oh, I'm going to sell my images. And I uploaded a photo from my iPhone and someone actually bought it. So I was like, what?
Nice.
So I think, yeah, gear is helpful, but it's not necessary whatsoever.
Cool, fantastic. All right, guys, last chance for Q&A to pop it into the little question box at the bottom of your screens. If not, I think we are good to be wrapping it up. Is there anything else that comes to your mind, Lena, that you would like to share? Maybe why you don't come to Font as often as we would all wish to see you here. That's something I'd like you to share.
So nearly had a trip planned to Font, and then I literally was supposed to be there in October, and I got a shoot planned in the UK at the time, so I can't come anymore.
Hopefully now
sadly,
with the...
But maybe I can come anyway.
Yeah, well, also hopefully now with the situation getting a little bit better around the... I don't want to say the P word, but around that, we'll all get to travel a little bit more and see everybody around the community a little bit more. All right.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us from your lovely attic. And Andy, thank you so much for joining us from our lovely attic.
And, thank you very much, Lena. That was great.
Thanks a lot.
I'll chat to you all soon. And thank you to the participants. Good night, guys.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.